Thank you. Yeah. And thanks for setting this up. And to echo both of your sentiments, I know this is a really tough time. Greg, I think you said this was going to be recorded, right?
Yes, we've got a
So,
recording going. So after, sometime in the next couple days, we'll get this up on our YouTube channel as well.
yeah. So if at any point you get sidetracked and go on Twitter and need to take a break, the content will be there for you in a few days. So don't worry about it. And my email and my Twitter are both on here. So feel free to reach out to me anytime about this stuff, about .NET in general, about Microsoft stuff. I have a ton of slides, and I know that slide-only presentations are much harder to pay attention to these days because you don't get to see my crazy hand gestures and like pacing around the stage, which is what I like to do. So I'll try and keep it interesting and move through them pretty quickly. But if I am going too fast at any point, feel free to pop something in the Q&A and I can absolutely go back over things. I have a few demos. As you know, demos only cooperate like 75% of the time. So we'll see what mood they're in, but they should be fine. But yeah, all right. So I'm Maddy. I'm a program manager at Microsoft. I work on our Xamarin tooling story. So pretty much I own the developer productivity side of things. So things that hopefully make your life easy when you're writing Xamarin apps. And we're part of the greater .NET team. I know this is a .NET developer meetup. So I hope some of you have heard of Xamarin before, but I'm going to go into kind of what it is, what you can do with it, why it's a really good solution. And then if you did keep your eye on builds at all, there was a lot of news about Xamarin in the greater .NET story. So we'll go over a little bit of that towards the end as well. And definitely take your questions there because it's pretty cool looking at .NET 6, .NET 5, and .NET 6. So my slides, go to the next slide. Nice. All right. Like I said, we're part of .NET. .NET's your platform for building anything, right? So Xamarin's kind of the mobile part in here. What a lot of people are familiar with .NET is the desktop and web story, but as I'm sure a lot of you know, it goes all the way to the other side of the house. I mean, there's IoT applications for it. UWP runs on Xbox. You can build games, all these great things. And .NET is really trying to get to this point where you can build anything kind of from the same core. So the same libraries, the same infrastructure when it comes to compilers and languages, whether that's C# or F#, and the same tools. And this has been a long journey. I mean, you might remember .NET Framework evolves to .NET whatever evolves to, or .NET Core and .NET Standard are two separate things and all the whole story. And I'm not going to go through that whole history for everybody, but we're really trying to get to a point with .NET 5, which comes out in November, and with .NET 6, which comes out the following November and is the long-term support version, where you can start writing your code and know that it's going to run on any of these platforms, no matter what you're kind of doing with it. So what is IoT? It's the Internet of Things. I think I can click answer live. Nice. Yeah. IoT is the Internet of Things. So when you think about your refrigerator, knowing that you're low on milk or something, like it takes a picture. That's one of my good examples. Or like if your washing machine sends a notification to your phone when the wash is done, that's the Internet of Things. And Windows runs on it, Linux runs on it, .NET Core runs on all different operating systems. So very cool stuff going on there. I'm trying to think of the name of the blog that does .NET IoT stuff. I'll mention it if I think of it. I don't need to go over this stuff with you all, but some cool stats we shared at Build. .NET's growing like crazy still after almost 20 years of being around. My favorite stat on here is 40% people new to .NET are students. I think that's really nice. When I was in college, everybody talked about Java and Python, and now I hear some people eventually say C#, and I'm like, that's really cool. So it's exciting to me to see how many new people are coming into the .NET ecosystem. And of course, it's open source now. It's been open source since 2014 or 2015. And it's the biggest contributor. Microsoft is like the biggest GitHub contributor. And most of the contributors to .NET in general on GitHub are actually outside of Microsoft, which I think is awesome. But I'm not here to talk about .NET and how amazing it is. You already know that. I'm here to talk about Xamarin. And Xamarin is the way to build .NET mobile apps for iOS and Android. You can build your UI in a cross-platform manner. You can build your native APIs in a cross-platform manner. You can share your business logic with .NET Standard and with existing .NET apps that you have, and you get native performance and native access to all of the APIs and UI elements that you'd want. So if you have a desktop app right now or a web app and you want to give your customers a mobile experience and your business logic is in .NET, Xamarin is a really, really natural choice. And of course, it's part of .NET. It's open source. It's free. It's fabulous. And the one-liner for it, if you were to boil it down to one thing, is an open source app platform from Microsoft for building modern and performant iOS, Android, macOS, watchOS, tvOS, all the OSs, apps with .NET. So it's more than just iOS and Android. You can actually target things like watches and TVs, and Mac is another part of it. And of course, we have a Windows kind of component too. So why Xamarin now? Why are apps so important? Why shouldn't you just build something for the web? Well, software is kind of a key to everything that's going on. I mean, we've seen this a lot with recent events too. When you think about contact tracing apps, when you think about things that are for communication and for delivery drivers and all those things. Web apps are good. Mobile apps are good too. Part of the reason people really like mobile apps is because they're flexible. So you think about different challenges, like all the different devices there are. You can really tailor your app to what device it's going to be on. You can build an app for an iPad that looks completely different on an iPhone, and it's the same code. You have that flexibility. And of course, being able to take advantage of the native hardware and all those things. So UWP, the top one in the middle here is the HoloLens. UWP runs on the HoloLens. Xamarin targets UWP. You can use Xamarin to build a HoloLens app, which is pretty cool. And Xamarin's been around for a while. It's actually 2009, right after the first iPhone came out, you could use MonoTouch, which was one of the predecessors to Xamarin. So it's been around for over 10 years, and it's something that we see a lot of people who are consultants and kind of one-stop shops go and use it for their clients, but it's also something that enterprise really trusts because of that deep foundation in .NET and that ability to share your business logic kind of across all the different platforms. So how does it actually work? All right, it's great, it's productive. Yep, your code gets used again. Very cool. It's native. I mentioned all these things. What does it actually look like? Well, you have your head projects, we call them. So in a standard Xamarin app, you might have an iOS project, an Android project, and a .NET project, which in most cases is UWP. But we have community support for things like WPF. And then you have one .NET standard project where all of your shared C# can live. So that's your business logic. That's your user interface, if that's shared, your platform APIs, so things like turning on the camera, the accelerometer, all those things. That can all be shared there. And like I said kind of earlier, but just to hammer this home, it's 100% native API access. So that means anything you can do in Java or Kotlin for Android, in Swift and Objective-C for iOS, you can do in Xamarin with C# or F#, which is great because you never have to make the trade-off of picking something cross-platform versus picking something native or 100% access or whatever. And because it's 100% access, we use kind of the modern performance improvements under the hood as they roll out. So you're always going to have a really high performance app. Your users won't be able to tell the difference that they're using a Xamarin app versus a native Java app or something. These slides, these are probably some of the namespaces you're familiar with. We have all these things kind of wrapped in our own version in Xamarin. Likewise with iOS. So you look at kind of the same .NET ones at the bottom, but then we have the iOS specific ones kind of up top here, and Android. So all these different things that are specific to these platforms, you have access to in Xamarin. And the tools you can use for Xamarin, I hope you're familiar with them. One would be Visual Studio, which is fabulous. And the next is Visual Studio for Mac. So if you are a Windows developer, same Visual Studio you'll know and love, but there is a Mac version of it. It's not Visual Studio Code. It's actually the full IDE experience. And it's mostly used for .NET and Unity. So develop and debugging your Unity games. Yeah, and we just got support for the latest .NET cores and ASP.NET Core, and I think Azure Functions and Visual Studio for Mac. So it's not just for Xamarin, which is fabulous. So what's going on under the hood? I've mentioned a lot sharing business logic, but that's not just the kind of code you share with Xamarin. So on average, and this number's actually gone up a bit since the last time we did a survey, which I think was about a year ago now. We should probably review that. We share about 80% of code across your apps. And we looked at this diagram. This is what that looks like. But what does that actually mean, sharing code? Well, you kind of have to take a step back and think about what is native to these devices. So there are certain things that your desktop computer might not have that phones might. And those are the things, like I mentioned, the accelerometer. Some desktops have Touch ID now, but in many cases it's a phone thing, or Face ID, and battery life, and the camera, and all these amazing things. Messages. Well, traditionally with Xamarin or with an existing mobile framework, any of them out there right now, you'd have to go and say, okay, I want to access the calendar or the share function. Okay, let me write that for Android. Let me write that for iOS. Let me write that for Windows. Okay, great, fabulous. And that's 3 different implementations. What we give you in Xamarin, in something we call Xamarin.Essentials, is all of these packaged into one API. So you can go and say, all right, turn on the flashlight. And that API automatically is going to compile down to the right thing to do for Android, the right thing to do for iOS, the right thing to do for Windows if it has the flashlight. And if it's not supported, it'll know what to do there. And that's one of the ways that you can share a lot of code, is instead of having to go and code the same thing 2 or 3 times, it's just one API. So that just kind of wedges itself in here with that shared C# layer. You can kind of think of that as the, necessary, the shared stuff there. And then you still have the ability to go into those individual C#. So this iOS project, this Android project, this .NET project, you can go in there anytime and do even further native things. So if there's something you need in Xamarin.Essentials, maybe it's a specific Android feature, you can go and implement that in your Android project in C#. You never actually have to leave your solution at all, but you have that access even when you share most of it. And then there's the other part of this, which is user interface. And for that, our solution is Xamarin.Forms. And you might have heard the announcement about .NET MAUI at Build, which is the evolution of Xamarin.Forms. I am going to call it Xamarin.Forms until we get to the part about MAUI, because we have not updated all of our slides yet. And I have not trained my brain to stop saying Xamarin.Forms yet. So we're going to go with Xamarin.Forms until the end of this. But just like the APIs, you can build native UI for each of your platforms using Xamarin.Forms and sharing it across one layer. And the one-liner for Forms itself is an open source mobile UI framework for building specifically iOS, Android, and Windows apps. That's where we target the best, with .NET from a single shared code base. So it's a .NET standard project, the same diagram we saw before. You got your 3 head projects, but in that .NET standard project, you also have your Xamarin.Forms UIs. And your Xamarin.Forms UI can be in XAML or C#, which is great if you're a XAML developer. So we got a question: what kind of performance implications are there with this shared high-level language? Yeah, so it's a good question. So the only performance implications with Xamarin.Forms are the way we actually render the layout. So if you're doing something like you have like 4 different stack layouts, which are our equivalent of a stack panel for Windows. If you have 4 nested in each other, we have to calculate all those. But that's the only performance implication. And it's fairly trivial. There's some performance things with just like loading images that you'd get regularly with a mobile app. But for the most part, everything is compiled down into what it would be native. Actually, I think this is my next slide. Let's see. Yeah, I know the slides. I'm doing great. Everything is compiled to what the native app would look like and should be, and it's compiled in the right way. So for example, for iOS, it's compiled all ahead of time, which is how iOS likes to do things. And for Android, it's run just in time. You can also choose to compile it ahead of time with our tools if you want. So the performance is actually like not differential from what you would get writing it any other way, which is cool. Not different. Yeah, and the cool thing about this is we've put a lot of work into going kind of above and beyond what the native platforms do. So for iOS, we have an ability to actually kind of run your code just in time. We call it the interpreter, which lets you do some cool stuff during development. And with Android, we have the opposite. Like I said, it's just in time, but you have the option to run it ahead of time, which is fabulous. So APK is an Android app package. When you download an app from the Google Play Store. It's an APK. And with iOS, it's like a .app, but it's just the app bundle package file. So nothing too much. All right. Another concern we hear a lot with cross-platform mobile is how do we stay up to date with the latest and greatest? I'm sure you saw the news. A lot of, every summer you get the new iOS and the new Android. And Xamarin is really, really proud of our commitment to same-day support. So what happens is when Apple releases their beta for iOS 14, we get that the same day as everybody else. If you're enrolled in the beta, you can get that on your phone. If not, you can wait until it gets GA. But that's when we start working on it, so that the day that Apple decides they're going to GA iOS 14, we also ship out our iOS 14 so that you can start using it that day and ship that to your users and push an update to your app. Android 11 is the next thing that's coming out. It should be coming out in a few weeks. So, and then iOS 14 will hopefully follow after. We'll see. Maybe they'll change the number. Maybe they'll throw an X in there. We never know with Apple. But that is one of the perks of using Xamarin, is that you never have to worry about being behind the native platforms with their software. All right, so I'm going to click out of this PowerPoint. We're going to take a look at what a kind of basic Xamarin app looks like. That's my dog. His name is Cannoli. His birthday is tomorrow. He's very cute. He's turning 2. And actually, let me go in and bump my font size up as well. And feel free to ask a question in the chat if this font or anything is way too small, because I know monitor resolution is always weird. So this is a pro tip. Go into Tools, Options, Environments, Fonts and Colors, and then go into Environment. Change your font to whatever you want it to be. I use my nice Microsoft font. Bump up the size, hit OK. All this stuff gets bigger. So when you're trying to present and your eyes hurt, that is a great way to make your sidebar bigger without having to use like zooms or anything. So this is a file new shell. Oh, you still can't see it? Oh no. Is it still too small font, or is my screen just not sharing right? Too small? Too small. Okay, actually, let me turn on my zoom too. Magnifier. Oh no, what am I doing? Just zoom out. There we go. All right, so let's zoom in right here. So this is the solution of Xamarin.Forms shell app. And so shell is just a way of doing navigation, but you can see it is a .NET Standard project right here, which is the name of it. And then those 2 head projects I was talking about. So my Android app, my iOS app. And in these are, how do I scroll with this? There we go. In these projects here, in the iOS and Android projects, are all of the things I need to build and deploy on that target. So for example, with Android, it's a main activity. And that points to the thing that initializes Xamarin.Forms, which kind of starts drawing my UI here. Likewise, Apple has their own as well. It's the app delegate. So this is a vanilla MVVM structure we give you with the templates. It's just, you have some views, you have some view models, and then a mock data situation. And everything kind of starts in this app.xaml file. That's where we initialize your Xamarin.Forms, and we point it to the main view, which is right here, which is items page. And so I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to run this app. I'm going to actually put it on my iPhone, which requires a little bit of screen mirroring magic. So open Reflector. Boop, boop, boop. Where are you? Everything's hidden. Okay. This is a very nifty tool. So Reflector, if you have an iPhone, and you go into AirPlay, you can find your PC. It thinks it's an Apple TV. Type in this code, and my phone pops right up. So this is a really nifty trick if you're trying to develop and your phone is like under the table or whatever, and you need it on the same screen. So I'll minimize this a little bit, minimize this a little bit. And so with Xamarin, iOS, you're always going to require a Mac to do iOS development, but we have a way that if you have a paid Apple developer account, you can actually plug your iPhone right in. This is just over USB, and put in your Apple developer account information, and we will build kind of the basic iOS app shell for you, and then put your code in it. And it gets up and running usually in a very short amount of time, as you saw there, but usually less than 10 seconds. And so I am going to zoom out on this a little bit. I know that code is going to be small, but this is just your XAML here. I have design time data for our previewer if you want to use that, but it's just an items page, and I'm loading in a list in a collection view, which is our performant version of lists. It uses things that automatically recycle under the hood, which is cool. So if you have like hundreds and hundreds of passwords that you're trying to show your user, maybe like in a Vault password application, it loads them dynamically. That's what collection view does. It's very cool. But I can go in and I can just change anything. I'll go into my about page actually. Oh, about. And I will go to my about page here. I'll change the color of this button. I'll change it to like, oh, purple. My favorite. Got some color previews. Give it a sec. Oh, I might have crashed it. See, I told you demos weren't in the mood today. Yes, but this, let me actually double check that this is the right thing. Sometimes I turn it off. What it should do, yeah, okay, is automatically update this page for you and show you what that purple is going to look like. So I'll go into, I'll try something else down here. So instead of app name, I'll just call it my app. Give it a sec. No, okay. So I'm in the preview version of this, which is supposed to be faster and better, but apparently that's not working right now. You can see preview. So we'll go back to the old way and try this. I can at any point talk to you about hot reload forever. So I'm not going to bog you down with that, but I'm more than happy to talk about it another time. So I didn't catch what was said previously. All 3 projects in the solution are .NET standard projects. Yeah, yes, they are. So they all kind of have your standard CS proj. I can go in and open my project file here. We are migrating them to the newer project system in the near future, but not quite yet, hopefully for the .NET 6 timeframe. So I'll change this now. I'll hit save. Now it'll update. How much is that? Henry, if you could clarify how much what, because I know I'm talking fast and I don't know what exactly we're asking about. But yeah, so I can have my iPhone plugged right in. Oh, Apple developer account is what I bet it is. It's $100. It's a one-time, oh, it's yearly, it's $100, but you wouldn't have to buy a Mac to start developing for your iPhone, just for debugging. With Apple development, you do have to have a Mac to push it to the App Store. You can always borrow a friend's. That is what I used to do. But in the meantime, this is a good way to just get started with your iPhone if you don't want to plug your Mac in over the internet. So I'll go back, I'll change this back to app name, hit save. It updates right away. So I can really quickly go ahead and iterate on this app kind of however I want. So one thing that's cool about Xamarin.Forms is that it just uses the native controls under the hood. So I am going to take away the background color and the text color of this. And I'm also going to take away the margin. I'm going to hit save. And this looks like your standard old iOS button. So if you're an iPhone user, iOS buttons look like hyperlinks, which I think is the weirdest thing ever, but it works for them. They know what they're doing, so I'm not going to complain about it. And I'm going to stop running this. I'm going to build the same app, and I'm going to build it for my Android emulator. And my Android emulator is running on like European time, so it's probably conked out of sleep right now. But it will get there in a sec. Boop, boop, boop. It's going to take a second to kind of rebuild and deploy all these changes. This is also possibly the first time I built this. I made this app half an hour before this talk because I wanted to make sure I had one loaded up. So it has to push the package over for the first time. Cool stuff. And what you're going to see when this loads up, it's down here deploying, is that this button looks like an Android button now. And the reason for that is because, like I said, it's using native controls under the hood. So it wouldn't make sense for this to look like an iOS button over here because this isn't an iPhone. This is an Android phone. Give it in a second. Thinking up all my stuff. All right, go to about. Yeah, that is an Android button. That does not look like the button we had on the other one. So there are a lot of ways that we can work around this if that's not something you're interested in. A lot of times people, especially in things like settings page, login pages, you want it to feel native, but of course you can style this however you want to look not native. I can go and I can add that background color back. I think we had it as pink. And we had margins, and we had the text was white, or text color equals white. or wheat, close enough, and hit save. And it looks a little bit more like that button on the iPhone. And Android, it's all caps, a little bit different. But there are other things you can do. I'm not going to get into them today. One thing I did want to call out is that we have the ability to use actual material design renderers for most of our popular controls. So if you've heard of material design, it's Google's way of doing designy things. If your Google Maps app updated and you had no idea where to find anything, like me, that's material design. So it's beautiful. It's different. It's beautiful. But you now have the way to actually go in and put a tag right in your XAML here that just says visual equals material. And I don't have all the packages installed, but it will use the same renderer on both Android and iOS and Windows. So your control looks the exact same across all three platforms if you don't like that native look and feel, which is what you get by default. So I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna close my iPhone out, gonna put this back in presenter mode. Okay, I can still see the questions, we're good. So what is included in Xamarin.Forms? That was the Xamarin.Forms app I just showed you, like I said. So the .NET Standard project at the top, the app has your forms code, your essentials code, which is where you get those native APIs, your shared C# and your business logic. And then you still have those iOS and Android projects you could drill into if you needed to do native specific things, access native APIs, change something in how the app is started. So with Xamarin.Forms, you get a whole bunch of stuff. You get a lot of things you're familiar with when it comes to .NET. So if you're thinking about data binding and your MVVM project, a visual state manager, dependency services and messaging centers, you'll get those with Xamarin.Forms. And you'll also get all the different types of layouts and controls you could possibly need to build a beautiful UI, whether that is in C# or XAML, you can take your pick. One thing that's cool about Xamarin.Forms is we take the least common denominator of a lot of control types. So when you think about how things are shown to you on your phone, there are different ways that Android says, hey, show this in a stack, show this in a grid, and different ways that iOS says it. Sometimes it's relative, sometimes it's an absolute position. It says put it at pixel 2,4. And what we've done is we've actually abstracted all those concepts out and given you these types of layouts and pages so that you can choose what's best for your presenter. And we just pick what the best thing that Android and iOS would want you to use to show something like this, what that is under the hood. So stack layout is kind of your standard, like one on top of the other, or horizontal. Grid is your standard grid. I'm sure you're familiar with grids if you're a .NET developer and if you've done desktop development. But we do the right thing under the hood for Android and iOS. And likewise with our controls. So you could see the button I was editing was just called the button. Buttons are called different things on iOS and Android. Likewise are all of these controls, which are some of the examples of ones we give you. But this is actually, I think the last time we updated this was probably February, this slide. We have to update it again, but it's going to require shrinking everything to almost like non-readable. So there are a whole lot of controls you can use. And I mentioned their native UI. So what that means is that under the hood in Apple, you might have your loading bar look like one thing, and on Android, it's called a progress bar. It looks like something else. Xamarin.Forms, it's just the activity indicator. It's all you have to type in, open tag, activity indicator, and you're going to get the right thing under the hood. Likewise, with something like a slider. On iOS, it's a UI slider. On Android, it's a seek bar. Don't know what that means, but on Xamarin.Forms, it's a slider. So you only have to type that thing in once. And then you can still go in and do those material renderers if you want these to look the exact same. Google tells you it should look like this. This is the modern way a slider looks. Well, guess what? We'll just do that for both platforms for you. These are some other examples I like. I think if you have, I have an iPhone and an Android phone. I have both. So whenever I try to switch between the two, I feel like I'm learning a whole new operating system. Like I feel like I'm my mom trying to send a text for the first time. So you are probably familiar with some of the differences in how the UI looks. But this is some of the other examples. And it's great because my favorite example of this is the time picker. Because if someone popped up an iOS time picker on my Android phone when I was trying to pick when my alarm should go off or something, I would lose my mind. I would have no idea what I was doing. I'd be like, this is not the thing I know. It's different. Hold on. Where are my arrow keys? Where's the cancel button? this is the really, really impactful stuff that the native controls under the hood is helpful with. So we never try to make our own. Okay. So one thing you might be familiar with if you are a WPF or a UWP developer or ASP.NET web developer is that we have amazing .NET third-party vendors in our ecosystem that actually create beautiful looking controls for us to take and put in our apps. So you have to show a really complicated graph, or you have to show some really intense like card view of all your different airplane tickets, whatever. All these companies build these tools and help us the same way as they do for WPF and UWP for Xamarin and Xamarin.Forms. So you can go ahead and Sync Fusion. They have a community toolkit and pull out their beautiful graphs and all that great stuff. Are there any tools or plans to convert Android layout XMLs to XAML for Xamarin projects? That is a great question. I don't think we have any plans right now, although I can't imagine it would be an impossible task. So I would love to see that come to life. The best way to file suggestions like that are developercommunity.visualstudio.com, or if you're in Visual Studio, help send feedback, suggest a feature, and then email me the link, Maddy@Microsoft.com, and I'll tell the people who need to know about it, which is me, but also the engineering team, that we should take a look at it and see how much work that would be. So that's that question in the chat. Thank you. Okay. Now, what does it look like when you actually need to do something that's specific? Okay. Pretty simple. I mean, it's a couple lines of code, or it's one line of code, but you can do it in C# or XAML, and say in your Xamarin.Forms page, iOS specific, I want this navigation page to have a large title, this giant thing, that's an iOS thing, or in your C#, you can create that navigation page to be an iOS large title page, and set prefers large titles to true. So this is just one of the various ways that you can tweak your UI. There's a whole bunch. I mean, like I said, using the two different phones side by side, the two different operating systems is incredible. The differences they think of. So all those great things. UI design, anything available for Microsoft's Fluent Design? Yes, so we are actually spiking right now how much work it would be to get the Fluent Design renderers in the material or the visual toolkit. So visual equals Fluent instead of visual equals material. And we're working on it. Things have gotten sidetracked with the state of 2020, as most things have, but definitely something we want to deliver. If not soon, then definitely with the .NET 6 timeframe. Cool. All right. And then I won't spend too long about this stuff. The messaging center, just cool stuff you can do using your C#. Everyone loves C#. So that I said at the beginning, you know, one of the great things about mobile apps over any other types of apps is that they run on all different types of devices. One of those new things is dual screen devices, which is really cool. And you might have seen there was a dual screen event, I think, in like the first week of February. It feels like an eternity ago. But they showed off the Duo, the Android device, and then the Windows 10X devices that they want to have running dual screen as well. So the Neo was the one that they showed. We're not sure like when anything is coming out anymore, but the great thing about Xamarin.Forms is that it targets Android, targets Windows, and targets iOS. So it's a really natural choice for building these dual screen experiences. And what we did was from the bottom up, we crafted a first-party support in Xamarin for the design idioms that Microsoft has recommended for you to use to bring your apps to dual screen. And one of the ones that we built that as a demo app is Xamarin TV. So you can go through all of our YouTube videos, click them, put it on two screens. In this case, they've got maps on the right and the app on the left. So you can watch videos while you're driving. Probably don't do that. Don't condone that. But dual screen devices are going to be awesome. I'm really excited. I don't know what they're going to look like when I like hold it up to my ear to take a call, but we'll see. Question, is Xamarin.Forms good to build enterprise grade apps? Yes, it absolutely is. that is our bread and butter, in fact, because we are so hooked into the .NET ecosystem. We're so proud of all the work we do to make sure that, writing business logic and sharing it with your .NET projects are great. Great integrations with Azure, with AWS, all the clouds that you could possibly imagine, and all the toolkits, CI/CD pipelines, all those amazing things. So I can, at the end, go back to the customer side if you're interested in more too, and talk a little bit more about how some of those customers are using Xamarin in their enterprise applications, both internally and externally. All right. I wanted to take you through a much nicer looking Xamarin.Forms app. We won't get too much into the code for this one, but I kind of wanted to give you an idea of what's possible that isn't just like file new, here's my list of things. So I'm going to open food app. Hopefully this is, don't save all the things I broke. Question, is it a .NET project but doesn't include all the .NET libraries? It has the base libraries and some platform targeting libraries. So it is a .NET standard project. We can actually take a look at the NuGet packages if that's interesting to you at all. But it is built using Mono right now. That's part of the whole thing with .NET 6. So Mono originally was the open source .NET version. It was built by Miguel de Casa and became quite a big project since the early 2000s. And Mono was optimized for mobile. And so when .NET open sourced and when Microsoft bought Xamarin, which was also, kind of like buying Mono in a way, even though it's an open source project, Miguel was the founder of Xamarin and came over in the acquisition. Part of the long-term goal, which we're kind of finally starting to get to, was the idea that Xamarin would build with all your standard .NET libraries. So yes, it has the base .NET libraries you need. Let's see, where can I, like .NET standard library, this one's 2.0.3, and platform targeting libraries. So this Android project down here, references, I think. Yeah, so I have these things like system.core, system.numerics, these things you expect. And then Mono Android, which is kind of the .NET version of Android. And eventually this will become .NET.Android soon enough. So I don't know if that answered your question. Feel free to ask again if that was too not useful. So, okay. First, I want to take a look at this app on my iPhone again, if it's going to wake back up. Let's see. Boop, boop, boop. Face ID never recognizes me. Hit debug, give it a sec. No. Okay, it's not gonna, I uninstalled the old version of this app. So what I'm gonna do is even cooler. I'm gonna pull up my Surface Duo emulator and it's gonna take a second. Nice. Oh, it's already got the appo. Cool, well, let me close that. I don't wanna get rid of the surprise. Here we go. So I'll switch this back to Android here, food delivery app, dual screen Android. And this is, again, it's a Xamarin.Forms app. So all the code lives up in this .NET standard project right here. It's an MVVM app. And the views are all kind of based on this main view, which is where we say, hey, there's going to be 2 panes. You don't really have to get too much into this. This is more detail than you need for kind of an intro to Xamarin. But, we have these 2 pages, 2 screens, restaurants view, restaurant detail view. So I'm going to run this, and that goes into these things. Give it a second. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, question. Has your side of the industry been affected by COVID-19 and the riots? Yes. I'm in a very fortunate situation. Microsoft's in a very fortunate situation that for the most part, we've been able to transition to work from home pretty effectively. We have Teams. Oh, I ran this on the wrong emulator. Whoops. We've been okay with the transition, but at the same time, I mean, people are affected from this personally. People have kids home, people have family members they're taking care of, and Microsoft has actually gone on kind of a hold down the fort mode where we're really not working on anything new that wasn't already planned. We're really focused on making sure that anyone who's using our tools right now to kind of get through this time, in this period of time, they feel like they have the most stable, performant, reliable tools that they can use. So we're really, really laser focused right now on productivity. we're also laser focused on people taking it easy. So no one is expected to be working at 100% capacity right now. And I hope a lot of your companies are having similar situations if you're fortunate enough to still be employed right now. So it is a tough time. My thoughts are with you all. I'm always here if you need to reach out to anybody. But yes, Microsoft is just as affected as everybody else. So back to food. Burrata is delicious. It puts me in a good mood. This is a dual screen app. So it's just on the left side of this emulator here. Like I said, this is the Duo emulator. You can get it online right now. I'll drag it up from the bottom. I'll hold it across the two screens. You can see the app completely changes. So, oh, well, that's a bug. Gotta go fix that. But I can go and I can scroll between restaurants on the left here, and on the right, it updates what it's showing me as the heading. So that's cool. And then I can go and I can scroll through this page like totally separately, go scroll through my featured items separately, all these totally different experiences happening on two different screens, even though it's the same app. And then I can go ahead, I can rotate this, do all that great stuff as well. But this is kind of a good example of a good looking app that if you can't tell these restaurants are fake, they're not real, but it's a really cool app that exemplifies some of the different design decisions you can make with dual screen, how they can all play together nicely. So let's pop back to the slides. 9:46. Okay. I was like, I'm going to go way over, but I'm not way over yet. So that's good. All right. How do you get started? I know I just blew your mind. Xamarin's the best thing in the entire world. You want to just spend all your time now building apps. It's absolutely what everyone wants to be doing right now. It's included in Visual Studio, including the community edition. So you do not need to have a license. You can just go ahead and get started as a hobbyist and try it out. When you want to do it, if you already have Visual Studio installed, go into Modify and check off the mobile development with .NET workload. Look for the blue Xamagon, we call it, the little X. And then when you install Visual Studio for the first time, you get the same setups. And because we're part of Visual Studio, we take advantage of all of the amazing things the IDE has. And we also do a lot of optimizations ourselves to make sure that, you know, my job, like I said at the beginning, is tooling. I want to make sure you're as productive as possible. So one thing we look at all the time, making sure you have the fastest builds possible. If you're a desktop developer, you're probably used to like not the fastest builds in the world. If you're a web developer, you'd probably be mortified at mobile build times because they're slow, because it has to package everything up and then it has to push it over the wire and then it has to install. It's a mess. So we get that feedback a lot. You know, someone who is a web developer builds their first app and they're like, oh my God, this is taking forever to build. And we're like, we know. We put a lot of work over and over and over into making sure we're shrinking this as much as possible. The biggest delta we've had in the past couple releases was with the Visual Studio 2019 launch last year. We actually shaved off half of the deploy time, which is pretty awesome. And we test these with like real apps that are heavy. So we're not testing this with Hello World. And that's given our customers a lot of, I think one of my coworkers did the math. It saved the average developer who built X amount of times every week, like 3 or 4 hours a week in just waiting just between these two releases. So that was a fun fact. That was a lot of time that I would have spent, you know, on Twitter, but I don't have that anymore because my builds are too fast. Other tools, I showed you this one, XAML Hot Reload for Xamarin.Forms. So you also have this with UWP and WPF. You might be familiar with it, but it's that idea that I update my XAML and it updates immediately on that running app. Super, super nice for when I want to design my UI with my real data in mind, with my actual interactable buttons and everything. If you don't have an iPhone and you do have a Mac, you can actually pair to your Mac over the internet and it'll spit up a iOS remote simulator on your Windows machine. So you can be all on one device. The way we see people do this is they stick a Mac Mini in the closet and it never shuts off. And when they need to see what their app's going to look like on iOS, they just connect to it over the internet, start it up. And they get this right there on their Windows machine, which I think is a fabulous feature. And if you've heard anything about VS Online, Visual Studio Code Spaces, this is definitely some kind of an experience that we want to bring over to there at some point as well, so that you can have this experience where maybe you're connected to an online environment and you're connected to your Mac at home or something, and you can debug your iPhone remotely, your iOS simulator. Then we have the standard Visual Studio things that hopefully you've grown to know and love, like IntelliCode, for C# and XAML. So you get those beautiful stars that tell you what you should be typing. Made it much easier for me to start doing demos because I just hit enter a lot and then it writes all my code for me. And I think there's another GIF for XAML. Yes, there is. We also have all the new things that they've been coming out with. If you looked at Mads Christensen's VS, I believe his session from Build had some really cool optimizations, like the new search features they're working on. I know they're coming out with a new Git experience, all this amazing stuff. And of course, live share, which is really taken off, I think, in the situation right now. So live share is the ability for, me to send a link to my coworker who is, if you know David Ortnow from the Xamarin.net community, I'll send him a live share link and I'll be like, can you fix this? It is broken. And he will be like, oh, let me take a look, click into the link and literally come into my VS environment and click around as if it's like a Word document and we're both online. So live share is fabulous. Okay. Question, does this work well for app game developments or just services? It does. Mono actually was the Mono Develop, which was the predecessor to Visual Studio for Mac, was the choice IDE for Unity developers. So Unity is kind of built on Mono and .NET. Xamarin in particular, many of our most downloaded apps are casino apps and game apps. When you think about like arcade or slot machine apps, those are Xamarin, which is really, really cool. I can't actually share any of the names. I wish I could, but we do have a lot of games. I know this is a long shot, but by chance, are there any plans at all to enable writing and running UI tests for both iOS and Android and Visual Studio for Windows? Let's follow up on this because there's definitely a test story. It's probably not as good as you want it to be. So send me an email, Maddy@Microsoft.com, Maddy with a Y, and we should talk for sure because we're definitely trying to make the UI test story better. Right now, we really only have unit tests. But ironically, the Xamarin.Forms team, the team who writes the SDK and is on the open source GitHub, they too are struggling with how to write UI tests. So I hope this is a problem that we all solve together, which would be fabulous. All right. Answer and say done. Okay. The next few slides are just kind of a bunch of icons thrown on a page because a lot of the times we get questions like, does Xamarin work with X? And we're like, yes, it works with X. Well, does it work with Y? Yes, it works with Y. So I wanted to make sure we get that point across. And oh, I guess scroll changes PowerPoint now. I didn't know that. So you might have heard of Skia. You might have heard of, I don't know, Azure Cognitive Services. That's a thing people use. Sync Fusion, all these amazing companies and third-party components and community contributions. These work with Xamarin. SQLite is kind of the go-to SQL database for Xamarin.Forms apps because it works really well on mobile. Frameworks. So I said MVVM quite a few times. If you're not an MVVM developer, hang on because I have news for you in a couple slides. But if you've heard of Prism, if you've heard of Reactive UI, MVVM Cross, all these things work well with Xamarin. And Uno is the UWP kind of cross-platform third-party tool. It's pretty cool. Uno uses Xamarin for all of its mobile stuff, which is awesome. Of course, it's going to work with all the things that make you a good DevOps person, or like me, you don't do DevOps and you just kind of cross your fingers. And like I said before, it works with all the clouds that you'd be using. So, in Azure, if you've heard of SignalR, which is that kind of real-time, that not chat, but real-time notifications and push and signals. SignalR and Xamarin apps go hand in hand. There's a 20-minute, I think, build talk from last year that is online somewhere, which James Montemagno, who's a .NET and Xamarin program manager, builds literally a chat room app in his 20-minute demo, and everybody logs in and starts using it. So that's pretty fun. All right, I know I've said this a few times. Build, Xamarin.Forms, Maui, it's evolving. What does that mean? All right, right now you have this .NET platform. It targets all these different things. Oh, I have a question. Uno, why Uno? If I do not have a website creation requirement, should I use that? No, it's really just a preference. I mean, Uno is a third-party framework for using UWP XAML to build mobile and desktop apps. Xamarin is the first party answer, and it uses our own Xamarin.Forms XAML API to build mobile apps and desktop apps. So Uno was trying to solve kind of like a different class of problems, I believe, than Xamarin was originally. But Uno's a great product. We love them. They're great people. When it comes to websites in particular, Xamarin doesn't target web by default. We are working on the .NET 6 story to have it kind of target the web via Blazor. I'm pretty sure Uno has a web story. I don't know. But if you're looking for a lightweight mobile app and desktop app cross-platform development, you can't go wrong with Xamarin or Uno. They're both great. I work on Xamarin, so I have to recommend Xamarin, but I love them both. All right. .NET. Right now, you're using the .NET platform. You have your .NET Standard project. You have your .NET Core project. You have your UWP app, all these things. You have to write your UI a couple different times. So you have to write your Xamarin.Forms UI for your desktop, or for your, for your mobile apps. Yes, your Xamarin.Forms UI can target your desktop apps, but you might already have a UWP app. Maybe you want your Xamarin apps to be built on .NET. So by bringing Xamarin into .NET proper, have it build on .NET, we are calling ourselves the new .NET multi-platform app UI. So .NET MAUI is the acronym. And MAUI seeks to unify a cross-platform native UI stack. So like I said before, it's the native controls. You're going to get that great performance on any device. It'll allow you to build these apps for any device from a single code base, a single project system, and it'll include desktop and mobile operating systems like Windows, Mac OS, iOS, and Android. So it's the evolution of Xamarin. It's the evolution of Xamarin.Forms. It's going to be part of .NET in the .NET 6 timeframe. So how do I, these animations are incredible. Oh, that was supposed to move, but yeah. So one of the great goals with .NET MAUI is that we want it to be a single project. So I know I spent this whole beginning of this talk saying, oh, you're going to have an iOS project, an Android project, a UWP project. We wanted to have one project, one code base, and it's going to use the modern project system. And you were going to be able to write all your code there and deploy from there. If you need to do platform specifics, you'll still be able to do that, but you won't have to worry about the overhead of having multiple projects in your solution. And of course, it's going to have the XAML and MVVM you know and love. It's also going to have any other architecture you want. One thing that we've spiked and that we're working on a lot is MVU. So model view update, it's probably what you're familiar with, or a type of MVU or MVC, model view controller, if you're a web developer. So we're working on an experience for that. This was a vision. I don't know. I'll share these slides somehow with you all so that you can actually go in and watch this video. It's about 5 minutes. But this is David Ortnow down in this corner down here. This is me down in this corner. And David goes through and walks through, like, it's about a 5-minute demo of setting up a .NET MAUI app. So .NET new MAUI. It's going to do all of his files and stuff. He has an app name he's going to put it in. And then he debugs it right here in VS Code. So this particular experience he's working on here, we're looking at VS Code. And there's no more of this Android and iOS projects. It's just this one project. So this is MVU here. So you can see instead of XAML and C#, you're actually just got this one body function, basically, which is where you build everything, which is sweet. And so this is an older build, which is why it still has the Android and iOS projects, but those will be going away. And then it's got your system drawing, which will be fabulous. It's got your hot reload. So he kind of does this whole demo while he's talking through it and reloading. And then at the end, it looks something like this. And the button works, it saves state, it's all beautiful. And you can see that's that blue text button that looks like a hyperlink. That's a native iOS button. So it's still using the native controls under the hood. Next slide. Nice. And this is a shorter GIF of it. So cross-platform development, like you've seen, there are a couple different projects. You have to go through a couple different things. What we want to do with MAUI is simplify it for everything. So, you'll be able to pick between all your different phones and everything, Windows, emulators, all that in one dropdown. You'll have system.maui for your UI, system.devices for Xamarin.Essentials. So you'll be able to access both Windows and mobile and Mac OS native things like battery and such, all from that shared code base. And you'll be able to put all your fonts and images just in one place, and all those platforms all in one place as well. And that's where you can put your specific things. So if you're a mobile developer now, or if you're someone who develops for a lot of different frameworks, you will probably think this images thing is a big deal, because images are dicey, because you have to have about like 7,000 resolutions for every single image you want to put in an app to make sure it looks good. And traditionally what you have to do is you have to generate all the different sizes and then put them in all the different project files named the right way. So for iOS, they do like at something, and for Android, you have to put it in the right folder. We're simplifying all of that with Maui. It's just going to be drop your image in, we're going to do the work for you. And it's very exciting. So that is all I have for slides. .NET's amazing. Thank you so much for having me. Xamarin.com is your resource for getting started with everything. We have a really great beginner like intro video course. We also have a self-guided course if you're not a video person. The blog's linked there. The customer showcase is linked there. Lots of great things. But I only have about half an hour before my bedtime. So I'm more than happy to take questions for the next 30 minutes. And that's about when my dog will start asking me to go to bed. So I'm around, and I will keep my eye on the chat.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Maddy. That was awesome. It's kind of trippy watching, a modern day intro to Xamarin, kind of thinking back to how different it looks from like when I was giving intro talks on this stuff 10 years ago or whenever that was.
Oh, I bet.
It's been a hell of a ride.
Who,
oh, there we go. Now
who
David's
has the softest hair in the Xamarin team? David, you know it's you. David has very soft hair. I made that joke on a live stream once, and he hasn't let me forget it. So
I just wanted to make you say it on record.
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you, Henry. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And my email and my Twitter are on the bottom, so reach out anytime. Where is the self-guided tutorial? So Xamarin.com. Let me go back. Go back. On the navigation bar, there should be something that looks like Get Started. And in there is all the tutorials and stuff. There's also a Microsoft Learn tutorial and a click through on docs.microsoft.com/Xamarin-Forms. Is Xamarin University free? So Xamarin University actually is replaced with Microsoft Learn, which is free. So you can go in and do the same courses as Xamarin University, the same content plus new ones updated for the latest and greatest Xamarin stuff for free, and click through those as well. Those are self-guided.
Cool. Anyone else have any last minute questions we want to get in before we let Maddy get to bed? All right. Oh wait, is that
the second source? Microsoft Learn. And docs.microsoft.com. Wait a minute. Xamarin.Forms produces larger app sizes for platform. In a typical enterprise app, how much bigger are the apps? Good question. So compared to native apps, it depends. I think a little bit bigger just based on the fact that you have another package in there, but there are a lot of different ways to optimize for what you want. So if you want it to be a really, really fast app, we can do a bunch of things ahead of time, particularly with Android. And it'll be a bit larger of a size, but it'll be really fast, and then vice versa. I mean, we can give you a really small app size. There might be a bit of a delay with startup as we kind of load everything in, but for the most part, they're really not that much bigger. I think maybe like 1 or 2 megs, which in modern day isn't huge. And that changes with how many images and other packages you're pulling in. But for the most part, they're really only very slightly bigger. The new versions of Xamarin are released at the same time as iOS is released, or betas released at the same time as the iOS betas. So the betas are released as soon as we humanly can after the iOS betas are released. So they drop theirs, we grab it, we scramble, and then we give you the beta. It depends on the beta. Some iOS versions change a single API. We get those out really quickly. Some, like last summer, 2 summers ago, oh my gosh, they had all the dark mode stuff and the screen time things. That one was a bit dicier. It took a little bit longer to get all that working. But when the iOS or Android OS goes stable, the new version of Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android are available that day for you to get and start developing with, which is awesome. Launch time. Yeah, launch time it's a thing people struggle with in all different types of mobile apps. It's one of those things that you can trade off. So you can have a really small launch time with a slightly larger app package. You can have a slightly longer launch time if you care more about size. But for the most part, it doesn't really add that much. A lot of the times we've been able to help our customers take off a lot of launch time just by the way that they actually initialize the page. So maybe if you have like a really heavy UI that's loading synchronously, we can make some of that load in asynchronously and it'll launch the app a little bit faster. I'm trying to make sure I'm keeping up with all these questions. So exciting. Answered. I think I haven't seen anything else, so hopefully mine's still loading. But if that's it, awesome.
Yeah, last chance for any final remaining questions. Give you just a few seconds. All right. Well, then I think with that we can call it. Maddy, seriously, thank you so much for the especially late night East Coast time. Definitely appreciate the awesome content and sticking, and thanks to everyone for asking so many good questions too. It's really great to see the engagement as we're doing these. You know, we can't get together in person these days, but it's really great to be able to get together like this. So I really appreciate everyone sticking around and asking a lot of good questions. Like I said, I hope to see everyone at our next meeting. It's going to be on June 22nd, and then the July and August dates and topics should go up really soon as well. And as always, you know, come hang out in Slack and provide any and all feedback is definitely welcome. But yeah, thanks again, Maddy. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and healthy, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Sounds great. All right, take care, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Bye.